So this is a huge pleasure for me to be able to interview Uffe Elbaek, and full disclosure, Uffe has been my political mentor over the last, I don't know, 10 years, maybe a bit less. And I'm going to ask Uffe, a very broad range of questions, because originally when we started this project, and certainly when we started the Alternative in the UK, Uffe was the very epitome, if you like, of the political entrepreneur, the person who was trying the new thing, bringing the new politics. And now, this many years later, I think you founded the Alternative, Uffe, in 2013, and now it's almost 10 years since that time. A lot has happened in that time, and I want us to sort of go through that period and bring us up to date in only in under an hour, which of course is really not enough. But just for those listeners who are new to this topic, who are not themselves political activists, I just want to say that, as I said, Uffe founded the revolutionary party, the Alternativet, in Denmark in 2013, and on entry into parliament, they gained 4.8% of the vote and became the fastest growing party in Copenhagen. However, he left the Alternative in 2020 and then co-founded a new party, the Independent Greens, who are facing a general election this September. So in the meantime, just recently also, I want to mention that Uffe wrote this incredible book, unfortunately in Danish, but for those who can read it in Danish, it's a beautiful read about his life. And for those who can't, it's also a fantastic book of photographs that take you through a very important period in life. So Uffe, I think the first question that we have to ask really is, what makes you, you? Right? Try, if there's any way that you want to approach this question, what is Uffe? What is the you that is this political entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a very broad question to start with, but I think, of course, my upbringing has colored my way of looking into life and the way I live my life. So for sure, my parents and that very special upbringing at institution or educational program called the folk high schools here in Denmark, and in a way you can't understand the Danish society without looking into the folk high schools, which was it's more than 150 years ago. Some very smart people here in Denmark created this opportunity for, at that time, especially the youth from the countryside to come into a program, educational program, with not any exams, but with the purpose of public enlightenment and with a basic in dialogue and the living conversation. And it still exists, and every year young people around the age 18 to 20 goes to these 3 months inspiration camps, which is it's an outstanding institution in the Danish society, and maybe the best invention Denmark has ever created, to be honest. And my parents was teachers at that such a program, so that of course colored my worldview and my understanding about how education could look like, and what really makes a difference, the dialogue and the relationship building between people. So my upbringing for sure has made a huge impact. The other thing I would mention is that I was 14 years old in 1968. So as a teenager, you just take life for granted. It is as it is when you grow up at that age. So I thought that Janis Joplin was the way to sing. And to be a young person, it was about rebellion in the street. It was about utopia, etc., etc., and it was allowed to raise all kinds of questions about gender and class and culture and spirituality. So in a way, I'm really a kid of 68, so to speak, but grew into a young person in the 70s, which was in Denmark a very tough leftist period, and we really believed that the revolution was just around the corner. So I think my upbringing and where life was when I entered this world, how the world looked like, and then on top of that, which also covers in my book, because I'm a gay man, and that feeling of that I was something like a bit like an outsider, for sure like an outsider. I was not like the rest of the gang, and this outsiderness in a way has for sure made a huge impact on the way I approach the established system. And there was a longing inside myself to create my own space, and that's also where my entrepreneurship came from, that I wanted to create my own reality, and I've done that all through my life. So in a way, I'm a serial entrepreneur. First created a very, in my view, a very dynamic and successful youth organization called the Frontrunners, and out of that grew the ambition to create a new kind of educational program called the Kaospilots, and and then the rest is history.
Can you just tell us a little bit about the Frontrunners? What was the Frontrunners?
The Frontrunners was created in the 80s when there was a high level of youth unemployment in Denmark, and normally you would say that we have to secure that these young people would get an education or get a job. And our approach was a bit different, because first of all, it was difficult to get into the educational institutions. But our approach was different, because we said, how can you use unemployment actually to create your own life? Out of that grew a very dynamic project-based youth culture, and in Aarhus, which is the second city of Denmark, and I could spend the rest of the hour just to talk about the different projects we did at the Frontrunners, but just to give the scope of both the vision, ambition of how we saw the world, was that the last big projects I was involved in as the leader, the person who was responsible for the Frontrunners, was that we in fall of '89, that was before the Berlin Wall came down, and we still had Iron Curtain through Europe. The Frontrunners, together with a very, very, very smart group of young people in Copenhagen, created a project called Next Stop Soviet, and we actually invaded Soviet Union in September '89, which was the most crazy project I've been involved in. But anyway, and the ambition was to send across the border with 2,000 young people from Scandinavia and move up to Moscow and organize a big rock concert on the Red Square in front of Kremlin. And just 3 weeks before the concert, the city council of Moscow changed they had said we couldn't do it on the Red Square, but it moved out in front of Moscow University. But it happened, which was the first time ever that the youth from West Europe was allowed to stay privately by ordinary Soviet citizens, and to create this concert in Moscow was, in a way, out of this reality, because we were surrounded by 6,000 soldiers, and then all these young kids from both Moscow and Scandinavia in front of the big stage, and good rock musicians from both Soviet but also from Scandinavia was playing. Anyway, this when we returned from Russia, we asked ourselves this very basic question: what kind of education should we have had to do what we were doing? Because at the university, we have not been trained in making a contract with the KGB, or we has not been trained in making conflict solving with the Russian mob. So we looked out into the world and said, does this education exist who trained young people to navigate very complex situation and land safely on the other side? And we couldn't find that kind of educational institution anywhere. We saw bits and pieces, and actually Anita Roddick from Body Shop had a program that sounded very close to what we would like to do, but not exactly. So we said we have to do it ourselves, and then we created the Kaospilots program, which still exists. So just saying that this outsiderness, as I started to talk about, goes hand in hand with this feeling or desire to create utopias. Say that there's another reality possible, and you just have to create it.
So you've actually mentioned, which is very unusual, I think, for the beginning of a political conversation. You've mentioned 3 educational, formats. The folk school, and then Frontrunners, and then the Kaospilots. And it seems that these are all vital to a new, I suppose, socio-political vision for the future. And you've mentioned that creativity, this building the capacity to change your reality, that's, I mean, it's a very inspiring, kind of idea that you, number one, can change your reality, but number two, that this is not a, like a mystical, strange, substance-led kind of challenge. It's something that you claim we can educate ourselves for. So we can educate ourselves to be these people at this time. So when you went into politics, Uffe, with this mindset and with this capacity, what did you bring? What was your innovation then at the time when you began this new political party? How would you describe the innovation that you were bringing?
To answer that, I had to take a few steps back, because I've always been engaged, politically engaged, and in the 70s I was really active on the far left in Denmark, but when we entered the 80s, I get tired of the leftist way of talking about politics. We were always against something, against war, against nuclear plans, against whatever, all of good reasons. But I missed that we were for something, that we were able to show a case through concrete examples, what kind of a society would we like to see. And so for nearly 20 years, I was not political active in a traditional political party, but at the end of the 90s, we saw the beginning of what I would call a more radical right in Denmark. The People's Party's rise to power and influence in the Danish political life, and I just had this feeling that I just had to go back into politics, traditional party politics. So I was voted into the city council of Aarhus and was a city councillor in Aarhus for 7 years, and it was a very inspiring period for me because I really like to work on city level. You can do different things on city level that you can't do on national level, and the way, of course, it's the same the way around. But I really like to work very concrete with a city, and how can a city develop itself, and how can we use our public spaces, and how can we work between sectors. But in around mid zeros, I was hired in to do a big international project for Copenhagen, an LGBT project for Copenhagen. And in a way, I thought now I'm again leaving politics because I was so involved in that. But then I was invited in by my, at that time, party, the Social Liberal Party in Denmark, to run for a seat in the Danish Parliament, and also try to get the liberal conservative government out of power. And we did that in 2011, and I became Minister for Culture, and which I really loved that position. But I also was confronted with the dark side of politics. This dynamic between media and national politics. So I ended up in a quite intense media drama, and the end of that was that I decided to step down, and of course that was a very vulnerable decision, but the right decision, because otherwise I would have not had the bravery to say, first of all, to get back in politics and not leave the parliament, face the opposition and the people who had made so much harm in a way on me, and not at least my husband. But I think I had to go through these very tough conflicts to get to the point where I said, it can't be right that politics is what it is today, and we have to create another space for political activities that is motivating for the citizens, because I think it's the same in UK. Even your system is even more broke than the Danish. I'm happy not living in UK at the moment, but
that's right.
But in Denmark, the situation is that only around 2% of citizens are member of a political party, and even way less are engaged in that party, and even less is directly involved in voting for candidates running for parliament and city councils, etc. So it's a very small percentage of the Danish population who is directly engaged in what we call politics. Politics. So in 2013 we created the Alternative, and the big difference between traditional political parties and the Alternative was that, first of all, that we were purpose and value driven, and we didn't see ourselves as either left or right. We said we're something completely different, and we're approaching politics from a completely different angle, and that we wanted not only to create a political party, we wanted to create a political platform where all kinds of stuff could happen. Back to your question about education, we could create an educational institution, we could create a media company, we could create a bus driver company, whatever, dance club, whatever, as long as it was founded in the purpose and the values, and that attracted a lot of attention. And as you just said, Indra, it was a big surprise for the established system that we came in with 5% of the voters in the election in 2015.
Yeah, so that was such an exciting time, and you had a huge impact, obviously, on the discourse, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is politics now? It's a different thing. We're talking about something else now than we were talking about before. And that shift. Can you describe a little bit more about what were the mechanisms, you know, for shifting that idea, like that politics is not just for, you know, it's not just about a few people who are educated at the top level to make decisions about the rest of the country. You're invoking immediately the citizens, you know, you're wanting to involve people across society in a number of different projects, and that is a different idea of what politics is altogether. So how did you manage to do that?
Of course, I stood on all my experience from my other work, and I think it's very seldom that you see politicians on that level, national politics, who has the background as I have, and I have to underline that you don't do anything alone, you do it together with a good team. And of course, I've been the frontman, poster boy, but I couldn't have done this without some really brilliant people around me, and this is teamwork. But because I had the experience I had, and I was approaching this project as I would approach all other kinds of projects I have been involved in, I have a certain kind of a design principles in my head, and because of that, the whole project developed in the way it did, because it worked out from this design principles. And I don't want to go into detail with that model, but it's really grounded in a very clear purpose and some core values, and everything develops from there. And I couldn't accept that politics was such a dirty game and such a toxic environment, and I couldn't accept that something which should be very lively, and I'm not saying without conflicts, but because there's tons of conflicts when you are talking about where should the society move, but and different interest fights, etc. But still, politics should be the most interesting place to be for everyone, because it's about you and me and how our lives should look like. And I knew that from my other work and the other campaigns I've been involved in, that most people actually has opinions and ideas about how life should look like and how politics should look like. But maybe they only have maybe half an hour each week to be engaged in this, and not full time and not professional and not seeing it as a career. So what we did, which was something completely new in Denmark, we said when we launch the party, we don't go out and have a completely full political program. If people should feel ownership for this new political party, they should be part of creating the party. They should be directly involved, and because of that approach, we created something we call political laboratories, and through these political laboratories, we involved thousands of people in discussion about the program. But at the same time you do that, you should be very clear what is to be discussed and what is not to be discussed. And what was not to be discussed was the values, the purpose, and our political manifesto. That was not to be discussed, but there were tons of stuff which was still up in the air. And because of these political laboratories, one thing was that we created a political program after 1 year of these political laboratories, but it was also very smart from a strategic point of view, because all the people who have been involved in these laboratories became ambassadors for the party, the political initiative. And that was extremely important at that time, because we didn't have one penny. We had to do this without any money, and I don't know if we could have done it today in the same way, because at that time social media also had a different approach. So the algorithm worked differently, so you could actually get your message out to really many people if you use Facebook, for example. This is not the case anymore, because you have to pay for it to really get this outreach. But anyway, I think our approach, the political laboratories, and then that this feeling that it was not only a party, it was also a movement. It was an entrepreneurial mindset, created a very lively culture. Our national meetings was more like a party than it was a traditional political conference.
Yeah. I remember it myself, because at the time I was working with a political think tank in the UK, and we were already, deeply questioning politics, and I wrote a paper myself about how broken politics was. But there was this kind of light shining from Denmark at the time.
Yeah.
Wow, something really genuinely new is happening over there. And when I came to visit, the feeling of being in this political movement was like something I hadn't experienced before in politics. And I think what you're saying absolutely is that you brought something to life. That there was there was energy. Energy was the point in a way. And, this lack of fear around conflict, I think, is also very unusual, because you said at the beginning, you don't want to be against something. Also implies you don't want to be only with people who agree, right? To be able to hold the conflict within the politics and to use that as energy for creativity is not the same feel that you have in most political parties. So were you able to maintain this, Uffe? Did you feel that you could keep this energy going?
No, but in a way, the way that you described the beginning of the Alternative, you could compare it with Summer of Love in San Francisco in And as everyone knows, there was some tough headache after Summer of Love in '67. It turned into something different over time, and I think that maybe it's too early to evaluate on the alternative, because just so the listener know that I stepped down in 2019 and was really happy about that and look forward to the new leadership. But that election of the new leadership in the alternative ended up totally in the wrong alley. And in my opinion, I have to underline that, because you can have other perspectives and opinion on that. But in my opinion, the members voted the wrong candidate, and that created really a lot of conflicts inside the team of parliamentarians for the alternative in the parliament, and our group split, and ended up. It was really a very sad moment in my view. Now they have voted a new leader, and maybe she could be the person who saved the alternative with respect of the history and the value purpose. So I'm not saying that the alternative story is over. Actually, maybe it will develop into something really interesting and good in a few years' time. But it has been through some troubling period. And why is that? I think that when you are very based and purpose-driven organization, and you create this utopia feeling that this is something completely different from what you're seeing before, it's like you're building a base, so to speak. But we as human beings are bringing our old ghost with us into the space. We all have our inner dramas, the conflicts, and so even if the space is new, the dramas are old. And
I love that phrase. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So and we were not. I was not aware about how tough personal egos and power games can be, even if the surface are polite and nice. And in my memoirs, I also look critical towards myself and say what stake do I have in that these conflicts developed. And I have to, of course, it's very detailed now, but most of the conflicts happened in the team of MPs in the parliament. And I could say a lot about how does this huge power machine affect you when you steps into a traditional power machine like a parliament. But that's another story. But if I looked into myself and looked into what stake did I have in the whole very tough conflict, how it developed, what I'm saying now is not very flattering for myself, but I have a mind that is, if people are boring me, my mind are changing focus. If stuff is boring, my mind is changing focus, and so it moved from one position to another where I think something interesting is happening, and something playful is happening, and where something new, surprisingly interesting questions are raised, whatever. So So if people are saying something what I think this is damn ordinary or boring or business as usual or whatever, my mind and focus are moving away from that to something which I find interesting and fascinating and whatever. And that mindset was not good because some of the discussion we had among us parliamentarians of alternative, my feeling was that it's not interesting enough. It's too ordinary. And then I focused on our staff instead, and I thought the staff was actually more talented than the elected politician, and that creates a very not fruitful situation, because it's like if you lose the support from your elected politicians in a group of parliamentarians, it's like you're losing the support from your board as a CEO, and then suddenly you don't have the political support from your closest political allies. And that was what happened in my case, that I lost the support from many of my elected colleagues in the group of parliamentarians from the Alternative in the Parliament. I could write a book about this. It was a highly interesting dynamic, and don't want for my worst enemy to be in that position as a political leader, that you lose your the trust from your board, so to speak. But that said, I think that if I should redo the Alternative and start over again, I would be much more clear on the contract between everyone involved, and I would focus the educational part of the project. I would focus much more. So with competence together, and also in a way a worldview together, that we were looking out of the same window, not maybe focusing on saying when we look out of the window, but at least looking out of the same window. And that goes back to another dilemma when you create a political party based on values and purpose, and you try not to be dragged up in this left-right thinking, then you attract all kinds of people that maybe can identify with the values and the higher purpose, but when you come down to very concrete discussion about money or economy or whatever, then suddenly another kind of conflicts will come to the surface. And I haven't cracked the code yet, how is that, but there's an issue there to be investigated into.
Yeah, I mean, you've thrown up a huge...
I'm sorry, I'm nearly too detailed in my answer.
No, this is...
I don't know if...
No, this is very... To me, this is very much, obviously, from the mind, to really interrogate politics from the point of view of the mindset, the capacity of people, rather than simply through politics. Through policy, to me is the innovation, if you like. Yeah. It's to be able to think of politics in a completely new way, which everything you're describing is doing to my mind. But I don't want to mislead any of our viewers into thinking or missing the goals that you set for yourself to do with the environment, for example, and the achievement, of really being able to, with this much more creative mindset, thinking more about the people and the bigger picture and the vision. Could you just talk for a moment about your goal with the green agenda and what you achieved in that time that you were part of the Alternative? Because I think these two things are very intertwined, and you shouldn't, forget that when you're talking about this period. Yeah.
No. And I know that I just fall down in some of the more dark stuff. And sensitive, but I just wanted also to talk about that because it's part of the picture.
Absolutely.
But the Alternative was really something completely unique, and it made a huge, and does still made a huge impact on both the way we talked about politics as the whole political culture. It affected all other parties in a way, and the way the media was approaching it. But it also affected hardcore political agendas. You mentioned the green agenda. Of course, the green agenda was the most important agenda for us because we said the climate crisis is the most important issue to deal with, and if we can't solve that, then everything else is doesn't matter, so to speak. If we don't have a planet to live on, then why should we about anything else? And we were able to take that agenda from something. When we do or have a national election, we are listening all the different topics and what is number one, second, third most important topics viewed by the citizens. And in 2015, when we entered the first national election, I think the climate was maybe on the 17th place in this hierarchy. But because that we totally took it and created all these important questions in the public's mind, then the next election in 2019, just 4 years later, it was on the top of people's awareness. And we were able to get most other parties during the election campaign in 2019 to accept a 70% reduction goal, CO2 reduction goal, which was maybe the most ambitious climate goal for any government at that time. So we've been able to take the climate issue from a more marginalized position to the most important topic for most Danes to talk about. And we have been able to push a climate law in the Danish Parliament, and we have been able to push a climate action plan connected to the climate law, and we have been able to get the government to organize a climate citizens assembly on this topic. So I shouldn't say that we were brilliant. Other people should say.
Well, I'm happy to say it because.
But the Alternative really did make a difference. And besides that, we have also been able to push the whole, and that was part of the discussion about political culture. We have been able to push some very interesting new law initiatives through the parliament concerning the possibility citizens be involved in the democratic process. So for example, we passed a law in the Danish Parliament. So now it's possible for citizens to raise a topic they want us parliamentarians to discuss if they're able to get 50,000 signatures behind this. You know it from EU level as well, this model, but we were able to pass that. So and now it's part of the way we understand the parliament's work, is that this is a possibility. And for me, that was really something that we were for the first time able to create another kind of democratic bridge between the ordinary parliament and the citizens outside the parliament. So we have had some very interesting discussion on the floor because of this new law initiative, and the citizens have been asking for us parliamentarians to talk about and vote about some very vulnerable issues that you as a politician would really like not to discuss, because it's ethic issues. And because of this law, a new law, this is happening today. And then this is my last term, and we'll have an election in a few weeks, or at least next month. So I can't say that I have succeeded in that, but I have, together with some other political parties in the parliament, suggested that we will reintroduce the second chamber in the Danish Parliament. The Danish Parliament had the same two-chamber system as you have in UK with the House of Commons and House of Lords. And then we closed the House of Lords back in 1953, so we have only House of Commons. But now we have suggested that we reintroduce a second chamber, but now as a citizens' assembly. Yeah, and I and the Alternative have suggested several new ideas like this into the parliamentarian system. So it's not only policy we have been pushing, but it's actually the dynamic inside the parliament, the way the parliament is structured, how the parliament is organized.
Yes.
So in a way, I'm very happy about the effect that the Alternative had.
So it sounds to me as if the thing that you're pointing at, is something that we're very keen on ourselves at the Alternative UK, but I see a growing interest, around different parts of the world, this idea of a second chamber, or that there should be a new relationship between the formal part of politics, the service-giving, tax-paying, tax-spending, formal part of politics with society, that there should be a new relationship between those two things, and that should be captured in a second chamber at the national level. But, below the national level, there's so much that could be happening, which could feed into that second part, and that's very live now.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And of course, we can't cover all the different aspects in this interview, because there are so many other areas to look into. But my main statements when I talk with, for example, young people, is that normally when you talk about politics and politicians, you immediately talk about members of parliament. And I say again and again, this is just one space for politics. There are so many other spaces for politics. And actually, everything is politics. The discussion you have in your workplace, the discussion you have at your education institution or in your neighborhood, that's politics. And we are all politicians, or we could at least be all politicians. What I would like to see is a completely change in the way we make decisions, and that is much more from the bottom up. Even I know that you also should make politics from the top down, because there are issues. Now we talked about climate change. There are political issues that we have to agree on, all of us, but we have to create much more dynamic, interesting political environment and decision processes, and yeah, you can start in your own family and take it all the way up.
Yeah. So perhaps just before we close off, I'm quite interested in how you feel when you co-created. I would be missing something out of this history if we didn't mention the Independent Greens and what you co-created there. What do you feel is the issue or the thing that you were bringing there with your team, with the other co-creators, that was also necessary to pay attention to before, in a way, you rounded off this part of your life? What for you is the Independent Greens bringing?
Of course, it's still very new, so I don't have maybe enough distance to be very sharp on that. But I have to say that if the whole election of the new leadership of the Alternative hasn't gone so wrong as it did, there wouldn't have been a need for creating the Independent Greens. But because of how stuff was happening, we were a group who said we're not finished in Parliament, and we need to have a political platform to work from. And then we created the Independent Greens. And the big difference between the Independent Greens and the Alternative was that it was much more aware about the need for a new economic model, and to really focusing not only on the climate issue, but also inequality and the whole racism agenda and anti-racism. And so that was, in a way, I described it in a way that in the beginning of this interview, that the Alternative was summer '67. Then in a way, the Independent Greens was Black Panther, Oakland, '71.
Okay.
Maybe it's a stupid picture, but there's a more tough, serious tone in the Independent Greens, and on a good day I really like it. On a bad day I don't like it. Because I'm this positive entrepreneurial energy in Independent Greens, to be honest, and I've said that, of course, to my colleagues, and I'm on my way out, so I won't do it to a big fight, but in the best of all worlds, I would like the Alternative and the Independent Greens to come together, because in a way it's a bit like the right and left part of the brain.
Yeah.
And both is needed. but I don't know if that is going to happen. But so that was on the political side. On the organizational side, what we took with us from the alternative was that it's really important that the contract between all involved, the people involved, also the member base, is much more clear. And the Independent Greens has tried to take the best learning from the alternative and try to create another kind of organizational model, and also very inspired by the co-op movements in Denmark and member workers' own companies. So the staff at the Independent Greens has a much bigger voice in the board than it had in the alternative. So there are nuances, and to be honest, and I can say that because I'm leaving national politics today. I think the story of the alternative, the Independent Greens, it's a learning process, and we learn from it, and then hopefully there are people who can take it to the next level. Because really, with my hand on my heart, I can say that the mindset of the alternative is even more needed today than it was in 2013. So even if the party nearly collapsed back in 2019, the mindset will survive, and it will inspire people. And there are so many small and big stories from the alternatives history that is really inspiring. And in a way, it was a initiative who tried to connect the brain, the heart, and the hands. So, but sometimes even your own body, you know it, after your body, even if they should work together, it doesn't work together. And that was the case with the alternative during that period. But I hope the best for them.
Well, that's great to know. I was really hoping to wind up in that, exactly in this space, Uffe, to think about how what you started there is still relevant and still possible. And I just want to rescue as well that one of the things that became so clear to me from the original alternative was the direct connection between, you know, the well-being of a human being and the well-being of a planet, that there's this direct connection between those things. And everything you've described really shows how much attention we need to pay to both parts, you know, of the story, you know, the story of the human flourishing as well as the story of the planet flourishing. So just as a kind of closing remark, what do you feel now that you're at this stage of your career and you've got so much achievement behind you, but it's not over yet? It's the way that I'm sure you want to have a break and I'm sure you want to have a rest, but you know, you will still be playing a role one way or another, whether you like it or not, right? As an influencer and maybe as an entrepreneur again. What do you feel when you're speaking to young people today, but also to people like ourselves who've been in the game for such a long time? What do you think is still possible to be done?
Everything.
Yeah.
But I also have to say that, and again, it's too, black and white, but in a way, I think we are facing a very dark potential future, stepping into a very dark period of the chapter of civilization, and it really worries me now that the election is coming up here in Denmark just in a month's time. Everyone expects, at least, and I can already hear the way the political parties and politicians are talking about the future and also about each other, that really is an echo from what is happening in the US. It's really, really, some of the stuff is really, really dirty and very, very dark. And what worries me really is that it's like, and even I can lose my way, so to speak. I really don't know what's up and down, what is true and not true. And I'm totally overwhelmed by all the trolls who attacks me, for example, on Twitter and social media. The way there's really a lot of dark energy out there, and it's like that. The possibility to create a common space where people actually can sit in front of each other or in a circle or whatever and talk about what matters and what is right to do, that space is really shrinking. And that can really worries me on a dark day. On a light day, I see a lot of people taking new initiatives that is really, really promising. And when I talk with young people and have time to do that, it makes me hopeful, because there are so many really, really good-hearted and bright-minded young people out there who, of course, want to write their own chapter of the story of life, and that makes me hopeful. And I think that we are at least I'm struggling with a dilemma that the world is really fucked, but life is still magical. And that's where I am today, because you are able to, on a serious level, to talk about the end game of civilization, how the planet is burning. I just had vacation in the south of France, and you go by train and you see forest fire, and you pass rivers that is completely empty of water, and if you then try to connect the dots and know that, for example, in France, that they have 17 nuclear plants situated at the border of a river, and they need the water to cool the nuclear plants, and now there's no more water. So it just as an example, that all the figures we get in on our table in the parliament about climate change and what is happening with the planet, it's really, really dark. And at the same time, politicians don't react on a serious level on the information they get. So there's a huge Grand Canyon deep split between what we know and what we do. And that's actually very unhealthy on a psychological level. That in a way, to survive, you have to block out what you know is happening, and that creates this space where, like Trump, as and the people behind him, that they're able to create this reality, a new kind of reality that that doesn't accept facts and scientific proofs, and everything is to be discussed. And if you don't feel for it, you don't. Yeah, you just say, yeah, maybe that's your opinion, but I have another position, and then you don't have a common you're not playing by the same rules, so to speak, and yeah, that can really end up the wrong alley. So normally, normally in my life I've had a quite good feeling about what is coming towards me. But these days I'm very blurry, and then in a situation like that, we just have to talk with each other and share emotions and experience. We have to develop a new kind of language that can describe what is happening, and we need that new language, also a new political language. So we are in a very vulnerable place in history, I think, and then I know you can't use that metaphor, but I just hope that all the good forces will join, come together.
Yeah.
As a fan of Star Wars, I know that you can challenge that perspective, but still, I think all the good forces has to join together, because then we are actually a very powerful bunch of people.
And that's possible, right?
Yeah, it's possible, super possible.
Super possible.
Super possible. No, but it's super possible. And just a few days ago, I talked with a group of young kids, and I said, yeah, and then I took my possibility glasses on, and I said, what an exciting entrepreneurial project. We have to save the world. What an interesting project.
And on that note, I'm going to finish this recording, because I think that is the point. That is the moment. That's the opportunity. There's no hiding the scale of the challenge, but that's the challenge we need, right? To bring forth our greatest potential. Exactly.
The world is calling for the best in us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Uffe. Still inspiring me as ever at this point, and who knows what the next 30 years are going to bring.
Yeah.
So,
I won't confident, but I'm curious what the next 10 years will how we will talk about this in 10 years time. Maybe you should come back. We should come back in 10 years and look at what we talked about now, and then and then reflect on this conversation in a 10 years perspective. That could be super cool.
Okay, let's make that a deal. Thanks very much, Uffe. Fantastic to talk to you. Thank you.